Are you feeling stuck in your career, even though on paper everything looks fine? Maybe you've been doing this for a while, you've worked hard, you've checked the boxes, but lately you've started wondering, is this really it? If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. So many mid career professionals hit this point. They're too far in to start over, but too young to retire, and unsure about what comes next. This week, I'm talking with Robin Camarote, an executive coach who supports people navigating exactly this kind of transition. Together, we explore the internal and external pressures that make it so hard to pause, reflect, and ask ourselves what we really want. We talk about letting go of the myth of the linear career path, how to separate your own desires from everyone else's expectations, and why confidence and clarity don't come first, they come after we take action. If you're in the swirl of questions or you're just starting to feel that tug of change, I hope this conversation offers you space to slow down, tune in, and start moving forward on your own terms. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Robin. It is so great to have you here today. I'd love to start by inviting you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Kim. It is so good to be here and to be with your audience. So my name is Robin Camarote. I am an executive coach for people mid-career and people who are finding themselves in this place of kind of having too much time invested to start over, but they're too young to retire. And they might be asking themselves this question that I was and periodically still do. And that question is this it? And sometimes it sounds like, is this it? Or like, is this it? Like I've had these moments like myself where I just, I feel like I'm working hard and there's parts of my work maybe that I'm enjoying, but there might be parts that are super frustrating. And so along my journey of trying to figure that out for myself, I started doing one-on-one coaching work with other people that find themselves asking that same question.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your own career journey? Like, what were you doing when you were asking yourself that question?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when I very first started working, I imagined like a graph on the wall where I would think there would be this line that would kind of like go straight up, like from increasing titles and compensation and responsibility. And for me, that's not at all what happened. There are certainly increases along the way, but there are all of these things that I didn't anticipate that came in that prompted me or caused me to like take a step back and make a choice and pivot or stop and change direction. So my career trajectory, I think, looks a little bit more like, a jagged line. And so it was kind of in big consulting for the first about 15 years of my life. And I love that work. And then I went out on my own and I've been independent consulting and coaching for the last 10 years. And so it's kind of along that journey at different parts saying like, is this the right project work or the right team for me? Is this the right kind of place to focus in my coaching? Is this the right like kind of community that I want to be building? So there were just kind of different increments that were causing me to ask that question.
I wonder if you can speak to this from your own personal experience or certainly from the work that you're doing. I think it's interesting what you're talking about with that expectation that your career is going to go in a, upward linear trajectory. I think there are multiple sort of influences that cause us to ask that, is this it question? Like number one is we sort of think there's a right way to do this and we haven't figured it out yet, right? And that if it's not working for us, then we must be doing it wrong. And nobody really tells us how to think about this stuff. I mean, some people have the benefit of greater mentorship, or maybe they're a little bit more proactive, but most of us are just kind of going through life, doing our jobs, We're trying to get through our to-do list. We're not taking a lot of time for self-reflection. So I think the other piece to this too is I don't really know what I want. Like, you're sort of put in a situation very early in life where you have to pick a major in college and kind of decide where you want to go. And then if that doesn't work out, it's like, now what? And so I wonder how much of this feels like an internal, I just don't have the clarity to figure out what I want to do, and how much of it is more of an external, I feel pressured to live up to the expectations that I've sort of set for myself and that I think society has set, and I don't feel like I'm doing it right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you just so perfectly nailed what I've felt and what I hear other people share with me in conversations every single day. And I think you're exactly right. There's kind of like those two forces, and sometimes it's hard to separate them out. There's that internal force that's saying, you know, I have a sense of what I'm capable of, and I'm not sure I'm reaching my full potential yet. Or maybe this isn't, I'm not sure the kind of contribution I want to make, even though I really know I want to have some kind of positive impact. So that internal swirl, I think, can create just a lot of like, just uncertainty and frustration. And we kind of stay in this swirl around that, like imagining these different scenarios and can kind of, and that's one of the places I think we can get stuck. But I think equally valid is that other force you're talking about, which is whether intended or not. I think our family situations, our organizations, and just kind of the way our culture is set up is that well, the right thing to do is to be pursuing that next thing. And I don't think there's any malintention there. That's just kind of like how we've all accepted that that is the path. And I have a very close friend who many years ago pursued her PhD, and she successfully got her doctorate. And at one point towards the end, I just asked her, like, what was driving her and what she planned to do with it. And she says, well, I don't know. My dad just always wanted a PhD in the family.
Oh, wow.
And and she's incredibly successful. She's made a tremendous career out of what she's done. But it just, there's this moment that kind of made me sad, thinking like, wow, it's so real that
Mm.
maybe without questioning it, sometimes we're responding to those forces. So anyway, a long way of saying, I talk to people that kind of are experiencing one or both of those internal or external forces. And I think then the opportunity for us is to really get in touch with what it is that we want.
Mm.
And answering that question isn't always as easy as I think we would want it to be. so,
Yes.
but taking a little time to kind of reflect on what that is. And to your point, like accepting that it doesn't have to be one thing. This pressure to like, know what you're going to do with your life is such nonsense. Like, hey, just pick the next thing and let's go with that. And then we know at the next point, we'll make another choice.
I think that's so important too. And when I think about what you're saying about your friend who got the doctorate and, maybe wouldn't have had she not had that influence in her life, there are times in which we think, and you said this well too, it's like, it's too soon to retire, but I've put so much of myself into this. There's this feeling of, I can't quit now, right? I put all of this investment into my education. I've been in this field for a long time. It almost feels like I'm gonna fail or disappoint people if I walk away from this. But I think it's really important to recognize that there's no such thing as wasted time, because even a doctorate, which is such a huge commitment, is going to teach you, if nothing else, more about yourself, right? That you can then use to think about what comes next. And I think part of the opportunity, as you're talking about, is really reframing our relationship to these kinds of changes so that they don't trigger that sense of, oh, I should have done this differently, or I failed, or I'm making mistakes, I'm doing this wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I love this point because, you know, uh, that kind of looking back with regret, or I should have, or how things could have been different, is not useful.
Mhm.
It's just, we can't change the past, and actually kind of like ruminate or kind of like dwelling on those things. I think it just feels it to me when I find myself in that cycle. It feels heavy, and and it's like more difficult than to figure out kind of like where I'm going from there. So I totally agree. I think how we tell our story matters. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about with this reframe is that if you find, if any listener out there finds themselves in this place of feeling like they have wasted time or there's something they should have done, like, how can you sit down and really rewrite that story so that you're taking away those things that are very real? You're not BSing yourself. They're very true, but that are things either skills or experiences you accumulated along the way that were really beneficial and are going to set you up for kind of whatever that next thing.
Yes, I love that you talk about the importance of how we tell our stories because like you said, we can't change the past, and everything that we do is yet another experience in our broad portfolio of experiences, right? And so I think learning what you don't want is just as important, sometimes if not more important, than figuring out what you do want. So if you are at that point where you're starting to question, really evaluating it through both lenses so that you have a sense of like, what is it that I want more of, but also what do I want less of, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and you're right on. I think sometimes when I'm working with people that are are really struggling to answer that question, what do I want? That's exactly where we start because a lot of times it's more clear to us what we don't.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's something that's happening in our current situation or our past, and that's a great starting point because then we can flip it. So for me, when I went out on my own to be kind of doing this work independently, there's so many things I love about it. And I love the flexibility and the variety and some of the energy that comes with that. But one of the things I desperately miss is being part of a team.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so a couple of years ago, one of the pivots I had to make in my career is like, okay, how can I still stay independent, but plug in with another organization where I feel like I'm part of something? And so I share that just as like, if for anybody out there that might be in that swirl of not being sure what you do want, maybe that's a great starting point for a journal prompt or just to do some reflection on, all right. And it might feel negative for a little bit, but you can very quickly see how you can flip it. And it starts to kind of illuminate that path.
Yeah, I love that you say flip it because I know it does seem sort of like a very negative way to start the process, but that is what tends to be most easily accessible to us. And then
Mm-hmm.
if you're just kind of looking at it as, okay, well, if I don't want this, what does that tell me about what I do? And I really would love to hear more too of any thoughts you have on a lot of times I think we've been so superficially focused on whatever it is that we're doing now, the people tend not to even feel like I don't have the luxury of time to think about this, right? I've got a family, I've got a busy job, I know I'm not happy, I know this isn't what's right for me, but I have no idea how to fit this what feels sometimes like this deep introspection project into my life. And I almost feel guilty I should feel like grateful that I have a job when other people may not. And so I wonder too if you can talk a little bit about how do we prioritize this and is it really as time consuming as it might sound?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, so you're like so in my head. Okay. Because, well, I'll just start with a broad thing that one of my limiting beliefs is very much around time. And I have three children and, dogs and a life and a job and all this stuff. So there are real things there. But like my whole life, I've had this thing like, I don't have enough time. I'm running out of time. I'm going to live it. It's like constantly around time and trying to manage my time better and like make better lists and da, da, da. It's always about time. So like you're so in my head. So just yesterday, I was on the sidelines at a soccer game and I'm chatting with this lovely woman. And she mentions this yoga place that it's nearby. It's like this like very rustic camp. You can go and do yoga and meditate and all this. And just the way, like, it just hit me like, oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. It sounded like delicious to me, like this idea. And so I immediately go on the app and I'm trying to book. And then in the next 3 months, I couldn't find one overnight where I could go take this time away to do this yoga thing. And I don't even do yoga, but like just in the moment, it sounded like really delightful to me. Anyway, so long way of saying I totally relate to this sense of not feeling like you have enough time. And I would say it doesn't have to be time in big chunks because what many of us do have is time in smaller chunks or the ability to kind of recapture time, even if it's 15 minutes. And so one of the things that I do for myself and I recommend to others, my favorite thing in the morning is if you can get up just a little bit earlier before your house starts to get up. I love a cup of coffee with my dogs and my journal. And I ask myself 3 questions, 3 reflection questions that just kind of like help set the intention up for the day. And those 3 questions are, am I running or resting? Or like basically, am I working today or am I resting today? Am I open or am I closed? So sometimes, sometimes I'm super open to all kinds of experiences. Sometimes I'm just like really need to kind of like hunker down and kind of shelter a little bit. And the third one is, am I creating or am I consuming?
Mm.
And so I love to write. I like to kind of make things and do things, but a lot of times I also like to learn things and I'm like consuming content. So for me, there's no right answer. And I don't ever want the answer to be the same thing every day. But if I just answer those 3 things, at least I'm clear throughout the day on kind of like what my path is. So that's, I think, one practice we can just taking a few minutes to just get in touch with like what's going on in our minds. And then it just sets us up for when those little moments happen throughout the day to just make a different choice or even just to pause. Like part of it's just slowing down and not doing the reflexive thing that we would have normally done and just giving ourselves a minute to be like, wait a second, like, do I really want to like, do this, I don't know, make this call or jump up, whatever the thing is. Anyway, so I feel like I'm rambling, but this particular question was so energizing for me because I'm like, this is like this whole notion of time scarcity and how to find time is like something that's very hot for me.
I am exactly the same way. I'm constantly worried about time and just how much of it there isn't, right? And I love that you talk about using smaller increments because I actually find that to be more useful anyway. I find that when you really start to take a few minutes to think about things like how am I going to spend my day, or what were the bright spots in my day, what were some of the challenges, what do I want, what do I not want, that your brain starts to sort of do this almost scanning process in the background, right? Like it's those questions are marinating in your brain, even though you're not realizing it, and you're starting to tune into things that you might not have otherwise looked at before. So you don't even have to be actively doing this for extended period of time. You just have to create practices that allow you to get in touch with it, maybe 10 minutes every morning, like you said, something like that. And then you're going to realize you probably know more than you think you do. And to your point about the reflexiveness too, I think the pause, we cannot overstate the power of the pause. I always encourage people to think about like, it doesn't have to be 10 minutes. It could be 30 seconds to just ask yourself, is this the best use of my time right now? Right? How do I feel about doing this? Does it bring me energy? Do I dread doing this? Right? Like just even giving that level of attention to something is going to raise your awareness around what you're doing, how it's working or not working for you, right? Choices, like you said, that you can make differently. Small tweaks can go a long way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's like, yeah, just beautifully said. I totally agree. And it's just like, my guess is that for people listening right now, you're probably multitasking. This is certainly how I like to consume, podcast content as well. So if you're out there walking, or maybe you're riding in your car or do some, something else. I love that exactly what you just said is like taking that even just 30 seconds to just ask yourself that question, like, and you can even just do a body scan. Like if you really like don't want to kind of get into your head and intellectualize, just check in with your body and be like, how do I feel about this? One thing that, many of us have the experience of being on like kind of back-to-back Teams calls all day, or, just kind of caught up in the swirl of things that happen at work. And even like one thing that will be incredibly eye-opening is just before each conversation to do that 10-second check-in just with your body. Like, how do I feel about this meeting? And it's a clue to where am I in conversations that feel energizing and I feel like I'm contributing and I feel really positive, and where are those that I'm just dreading because they feel heavy or miserable or like whatever. And that also can be useful data for when you start to kind of ask yourselves those questions about kind of like, what do you want next?
Yes. I love that you describe it as data. I think about that too. It's just you're collecting the data on how you're experiencing your work and your everyday environment, right? And I also like to add that if things aren't feeling great right now, it's not I wouldn't encourage people to immediately run to the nearest exit, right? I think it's important to get that awareness, but then there may be things that you can do differently within your existing role, or maybe you can be putting together a longer term plan for where you want to go next, and then using the time that you're in your existing role to fill in any potential gaps that might exist. Like, I don't want people to panic and feel like, oh no, I'm realizing that I'm spending, a lot of time in this negative energy space. That doesn't mean that you have to immediately leave. It's just good information to have to then start to think more intentionally about your longer term plan too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. Um, yeah, there only one time in my career did I make a rush decision to leave a job. And it was in this extreme moment of frustration and if I'm being honest, anger and sadness. And I only gave myself about 24 hours to think about it, and then I quit. And um, while I, while ultimately that was the right decision for me to kind of get out of that particular role, I do wish I had done it differently, because there was damage to the relationships that never, since I think we've tried to do some repair there, but you know, I think one thing I've realized, like looking back at my career, is that the relationships that I have professionally are some of the most cherished things that I have. Like this, I just find this so fulfilling. And so to damage one in a way that really wasn't necessary is something that I wouldn't do again. And I think when we do, but I understand when you're in that situation where you're just feeling just really at the end of your rope and so frustrated, it can be tempting to kind of make that jump. And it just, in my personal experience, it's one that I wish I'd just taken a little bit more time with.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, sometimes we do experience really intense emotions. It's part of being human, and there is that feeling of I just have to leave. I have to take care of myself. In rare cases, that may actually be true. If
Mm-hmm.
you're in like a really almost toxic, abusive situation, right? If you're feeling like your physical or mental health is being challenged in really intense ways, like there may be times when that is necessary, but I think more often than not, it is important to just sort of let the moment pass a little bit, right? And then really start to think about, okay, what do I want to do with intentionality? How is this going to affect me in the short term, in the long term? The relationships, as you mentioned, are important. What am I going to be proud of when I look back on this moment? Some of those bigger values-based questions that we might skip over if we're making an emotional decision.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, well, good. So,
Yes. So I was going to ask you too, if there are, you mentioned the tips around some of the questions to ask ourselves, some of the ways of checking in with ourselves. Is there anything else that you recommend busy people who are maybe just starting to see themselves in this conversation and think, I'm not sure I'm ready yet, but I want to be more proactive, that you
yeah,
recommend they do?
yeah. So one of the things that I find is, helpful, because the vast majority of people that I work with are asking themselves this question about, like, and kind of like what's next. Is that I think it's sometimes hard to think our way to clarity around that.
Hmm.
And instead, what we can do is basically set up like either little data gathering experiments or some kind of like experiences that help get us more information about what that thing might be. And so the faster that we kind of get out of our heads and kind of into some kind of action, and
Hmm.
it could be tiny, it could be things like, setting up informational interviews, or, maybe sitting in on like some kind of like webinar or something for a different industry, or like there can be all these different kinds of things that we can do just to start getting ourselves in motion.
Mhm.
Because I think sometimes if we're sitting waiting for this bolt of clarity, in my experience, that rarely just happens. And instead, the more we're kind of like out there experiencing things and really tuned into kind of how we're feeling about, like how it sits with us and how we're feeling about it, we're like the more likely whatever that next fulfilling, meaningful thing is going to emerge.
I think that's such an important point too, because when we're just in our heads, that's also where fear tends to take over, and we start to second guess ourselves, or we start to come up with excuses. And I always say, right, confidence follows action. It's not the other way around. When you're
Yeah.
thinking about making a big change, especially in the middle of a busy life, there could be, all kinds of fears and worries about what might happen, and reasons why this isn't the right time, and why we justify staying in the wrong situation. But those action steps that you're talking about give you a chance to actually experience something different, and then the confidence follows on the other side of that. So I think anything that we can do to, like you said, get out of our heads is a really important part of the process.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. I mean, I love that point. I think so often we're waiting, and this makes sense, right? Because when we feel confident, it feels amazing. And so there's everybody listening right now has something that they feel ultra confident about. Like, and when you tap into that, it's delightful. Of course, we all would love to be there. But the reality is exactly what you just said, is that when we're waiting to feel confident to take our next step, especially if it's something that's going to push us to grow a little bit, we're going to be waiting for a long time, if and maybe forever, because that confidence comes from taking action, getting the experience, and then looking back and saying like, "Oh my gosh, look what I did it! Like that's amazing." I also feel like clarity comes from action. I also, and this impact that so many of us want comes from taking some kind of action. So I like we were talking about before, I think there's tremendous value in kind of doing the reflection and journaling and taking those kind of big looks at like what we, like where we are in our life and where we want to go, and being our own self monitor for when that's kind of enough and when it's really time to like get in motion. And if you find yourself for weeks on end kind of circling around the same question, or you find yourself ruminating and regret, like that's a really good signal to say, okay, enough. What can I do to get myself in motion so that then I know, like knowing that confidence, that clarity, and that impact is going to come next.
Yeah, you're right. I think that is important. And you're also making me think about the fact that we tend to get all in our heads about the unknown for obvious reasons. That's part of just being human, is there's that the devil mentality, right?
Mhm.
But I also think what's important to evaluate as part of the introspection process too is like not just what are the risks of making this change, and moving in these new directions, but also what is the risk of staying where I am right now? What do
Mhm.
I lose if wake up a year from now and I'm still in the same situation that I'm in now, right? To just kind of balance the scales a bit, because we are super loss avoidant. We get very comfortable in our comfort zones, even if they're miserable places, right? And
Mhm.
so to also put it in perspective that not making that decision, not making a change is a choice too that isn't neutral. It has consequences as well.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I very distinctly remember there was a couple of years ago now, where, I love setting goals, and refresh kind of like maybe on regular cycles. Like I think most people do, like the beginning of the year, maybe the beginning of the month, week, like whatever. So, but it was like around first of the year, and I went back to kind of refresh my goals for the year. And Kim, I tell you, like I looked at them and I was like, all I needed to do was change the date on the file. Like none of them were done.
Oh.
But a whole year had passed. I had been working tons, but like nothing had moved forward like in a meaningful way. And it was like it was really a terrible feeling. I'm working with somebody right now who feels like they've been kind of in this cycle of trying to figure out their next thing for a couple of years now. And going back to our sense of time, like for those of us that feel like, you know, not that time's running out, but we you can kind of like start to see like, I don't want to be doing this forever. Um, that can be a really, really a negative feeling. And so to your point about like having a really good handle on kind of like what is the risk of not taking action. And I think for many of us, it's that unrealized potential. It's this deep knowing that we're here to do something that is meaningful as we define it, not defined by anybody else. And until and so being on that path to kind of do that work is so important.
Yeah, you're right. And I think too, when you talk about the pressure of time and the ways too that we also blame ourselves and we feel guilty and we feel ashamed that we're not doing more, I think it's also important to recognize if you have been putting this off, don't kick yourself for it either, right? Our brains do things for a purpose. They may not always make sense and it may not always serve us, but maybe you just weren't ready before. Trust that you were making the decisions that were right for you at the time, right? If you got busy and sidetracked, like when you talk about not completing your goals, it's not because you were standing still, it's because you were doing a lot of other things at the time, right? And I
Right.
think that's important for people to remind themselves of too, is like you're operating in a very complex environment with lots of inputs coming at you. And sometimes we get to the end of the day and we feel like I didn't do anything I set out to accomplish. Well, you did a lot of other things instead. So to just be kind to yourself too and recognize like if you're feeling like I should have done this sooner, it's never too late and now is better than tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Like start where you are.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it feels to me like kind of circling back to something that we talked about at the beginning conversation, like that kind of beating yourself up and that kind of regret, it's just not useful.
Mhm.
And I feel like if it was useful, I'd be like a cheerleader for it, but it's just not. Like I've tried it myself, it does not work. Um, but I also think, sometimes I find myself thinking about like, all right, when there's some goals that I might have set earlier in my life that it might still be out there at some point. And when is it okay to call, like, say, you know what? Like, I thought I wanted that at some point, but I just don't. Like,
Mhm.
and and not to define that as like quitting or giving up, but saying like, my situation has changed, my perspective has changed on things. Like something I thought I was going for is just no longer important to me, and that's totally okay. It's
Yes.
okay to call it like and just wipe something off your slate that's hasn't been done but now is just not important to you. Just like doing it for the sake of doing it, I think doesn't serve you either. So also letting go of things that are just no longer of interest.
I think that's a really good point too. And it's helpful to check in with yourself of like, why am I not doing this? Am I not doing it because I'm afraid, or am I not doing it because it just doesn't motivate me anymore? In which
Right.
case, like you said, it's probably a values misalignment. You've changed, your circumstances have changed. Just because we set a goal, 6 months ago or a year ago doesn't mean that we still are committed to that goal. And that's why it's helpful to do these kind of check-ins with yourself on a regular basis so that you're kind of in a more steady, you're more steadily in tune with yourself.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, and I think you just said it. I mean, like that to me is where I want to find myself, is like steadily in tune,
Hmm.
because that's, in whichever way we were, kind of you do those check-ins. I mean, I think that is where you find your power, is when you are steadily in tune with how you're feeling about things, how you're thinking about them. You're just that more like just stronger and more able to kind of make an intentional decision, because you're exactly right. We all have like zillions of opportunities every day. Most of them we just kind of like go on default because that's understandably that's just kind of how we need to get through the day. But when we are in tune, then I think you can make those choices at increments and just end up in a place that you're really happy with and feel more fulfilled.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really sort of inspirational way to wrap up too. It's all about just feeling more fulfilled and feeling like you're a better version of yourself, right? It's not designed to make you feel like you're not doing enough, or, it's like, it's more so intended to liberate you from some of the things that may not be working than it is to add another layer of pressure of like, oh, now you've got to also be doing this, and this on top of everything else that you're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I know, absolutely defined by you. And I mean, that's really ultimately all that matters is by your own yardstick, like, how are you doing?
Exactly. This has been fantastic, Robin. Thank you so much. I feel like this has been very insightful and also actionable, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people, especially right now where there's just so much change going on, and it's so helpful to just take stock and reflect a little bit more. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Oh my gosh. Well, no, thank you for the work you're doing. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I feel like we have a lot of very, very similar ideas about things.
I agree.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.